Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Vines, and I'm the Research Director for Area Studies and International Law here at Chatham House. So I'm chairing today's morning breakfast meeting. Thank you for coming. We're lucky to be having Dr. Luis Verdaguer-Caso, the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, speaking to us today about Mexico's foreign policy priorities in a changing world. I can't think of anything more topical and more interesting. So this, I imagine, will be both a fascinating presentation, Dr. Luis, but also an interesting Q&A. You are at Chatham House, but you don't need to know anything today about the Chatham House rule because it's fully on the record. So there are cameras at the back of the room, and enjoy the opportunity to have a robust interaction with the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. If you've got phones, could you just make sure that they're on silent or vibrate so as not to disturb the proceedings? I don't think I want to say anything more, so as to give maximum interaction time, just to thank you for coming this morning at this fairly early hour, and to thank Dr. Luis Verdaguer-Caso for coming to Chatham House and speaking. Secretary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you all for being here this morning. It's a great honor to be here at Chatham House and to be in London at a time where both the UK and Mexico face significant and interesting challenges on how we relate to the world, and particularly to the regions where we've been doing most of our trade and investment relations. In the case of Mexico, as you well know, we are at a moment of definition. What will be decided over the next few months, perhaps even weeks, will have a profound effect on how Mexico relates to the world, particularly to North America. And it is no secret that after the election of President Donald Trump, Mexico is facing a significant challenge on redefining our relationship with North America. And to Mexico, North America is quite important. 80% of our exports go into the United States of America. 2/3 of the tourists that we get, over 20 million people, come from the US to visit Mexico every year. And we have a substantial number of Mexicans in the US. We do about $1 million of trade per minute with the United States of America. Every day, more than 1 million people cross legally our border with the United States of America. So this is to give you some perspective of how important, why is this such an engaging moment for Mexico. And as we face the challenges, I want to first of all tell you that we do so based on our principles, with clear objectives, and of course with clear limits of what we can do and what we will not do under any circumstance. This principle starts by acknowledging that Mexico is a sovereign nation, a sovereign, big, strong nation with a long history, strong traditions, great culture, and great opportunities ahead, no matter what the scenario we face. We are a nation that engages constructively in negotiations. We have a long track record of successful dealings with the world. We are a country with free trade agreements with 46 nations, and we will continue to be a very open country to the world. We are embracing this challenge in good faith, constructively, with convinced that there's space to make this a win-win outcome, or I should say a win-win-win outcome, because it's about 3 countries. It's about Mexico, Canada, and the United States of America. So we are going through this process constructively, and it's been certainly a challenge, I believe, for the whole world to deal with the new U.S. administration that is changing the way the U.S. stands to the world, and certainly to its neighbor to the south. Throughout the year, we've been developing relationships institutional relationships with the different areas of government. And we've been able to start a process, which is a professional process from the Mexican side. We have a very strong team of experienced negotiators that are leading the process of modernizing or renegotiating NAFTA. And we will continue to do so. We will continue to face this process in a professional way. These are technical matters with complexities that need to be dealt that way. And we're right in the middle of it. In a way, this is crunch time for NAFTA. And we just finished the fourth round. The fourth round, we've had some progress, but we also faced, as we expected, complexities and things that we may not all agree as the proposals are being presented. That is what is to be expected in any trade negotiation, and I don't think that anybody should expect something different out of this very particular, this very special renegotiation of a trade agreement. And of course, we don't resist modernizing NAFTA. NAFTA is a relatively old trade agreement. It was drafted 25 years ago, enacted in 1994. And since then, we've learned a lot. The world has changed. And there are many improvements that can be done on the treaty. And we are embracing the opportunity to do so. Things like including e-commerce or including energy, which was excluded from the original NAFTA because of, back then, the regulations prevailing in Mexico, which have changed since. Also, we can raise significantly our labor standards, our intellectual property protection standards, and the environment standards can also be increased. We want to use this opportunity to make Mexico a better business environment. And that includes adding a new anti-corruption chapter to NAFTA, which we're pursuing actively. And we want and believe this is an opportunity to strengthen our framework towards this objective. So there are many things that we want out of NAFTA. Of course, the United States, under President Trump, has a set of specific objectives, which we may agree or not, but there are certainly clear stated objectives that we're looking into a way to accommodate those objectives in a way that does create no harm, in a way that will be beneficial also for Mexico and certainly for Canada. One of those objectives is to reduce the trade deficit, the bilateral trade deficit between Mexico and the United States. Out of over $500 billion of trade, there's a trade deficit of around $60 billion. That's 12% of total trade deficits. And the US has very clearly stated that they want that deficit reduced. Again, we might not agree with that as an objective per se, but we acknowledge that as a fact of life, that's what one of the parties wants to address. And we are looking for ways into how we can do that constructively in a way that does not affect the Mexican economy and the Mexican well-being. And I anticipate that the core of the discussion will continue to be around that particular issue. And we think about trade deficit, you got to look at the auto industry, because if you look closer into the trade balance between our two countries, it's very clear that the trade balance without the auto industry, without cars and trucks, there's no deficits. So the trade deficit is explained a lot fundamentally by the auto industry. So a lot of the proposals that you hear, if you look at the papers after the fourth round, you'll see there's a lot of controversy on specific rules presented to address that issue in the car industry, including rules of origin and potentially things that we certainly would not accept, national content rules. But there's going to be, you should expect a lot of action and a lot of discussion around the car industry, and for a reason. It's what explains the trade deficit. Overall, we believe this is an opportunity, and we look forward to make it real. But we've got to be prepared for different scenarios, and there's certainly a possibility that at the end we may not able to get into an agreement. And the US may decide to withdraw from NAFTA. If that happens, it's certainly not the end of the world for Mexico. First of all, trade between Mexico and the US will continue. Keep in mind that less than half of trade, of existing trade, happens under NAFTA rules. That is more than half of the trade that happens between Mexico and the US currently happens under WTO rules. It means that trade will continue, and the tariffs that could be imposed between the two countries are relatively small. On average, the US can impose a 3% tariff on Mexican goods. On average, Mexico can impose a 6% tariff on US goods under WTO rules. So trade will continue. The biggest challenge is probably on protecting investment, on the rules that give certainty to invested assets, and that will be a core of the response that the Mexican government would present, is how to unilaterally preserve the protections that NAFTA brings to investors and to companies that have assets already in the Mexican economy, different sectors throughout the economy. And we're obviously thinking about those proposals. But beyond that, certainly this scenario and the challenge that we're facing has been a strong motivation to accelerate our diversification of trade and investment relationships throughout the world. And that's the reason why I'm here in the UK, and that's the reason why I spent the first couple of days of this week in Italy, and why we are in China and in Japan and in South America. And that's why we are in the process of updating our trade agreement with the European Union. And we expect that modernization to be completed by the end of this year. It's been a long process. It's already been more than over a year and a half doing this, and we are optimistic about the prospects of completing the agreement this year and then subjected to ratification. We are also, for the first time in many, many years, working to get a trade agreement with Brazil. Mexico and Brazil are the largest economies in the region of Latin America, and we don't have a trade agreement. And now we have an opportunity there. So we're pursuing that. We're also pursuing an agreement with Argentina. Through the Pacific Alliance, for those that you might not be familiar with the concept, the Pacific Alliance is a very dynamic association between 4 Latin American countries, Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, that among ourselves we have completely liberalized trade and movement of people and capital between our 4 countries. Now, as a bloc, we have started negotiations to have a regional trade agreement with Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Canada has joined in the effort. We are also continuing the discussions of having a TPP 11. That's a TPP without the United States. And we will be in Vietnam next month. And there's going to be a leaders summit on how to move forward on TPP 11. So we are expanding our horizons. We are a very open economy and will continue to be a very open economy. So, we strongly believe in the competitiveness of Mexican manufacturing in a country that 35 years ago used to sell to the world mostly crude oil, and today our exports are 90% or more manufacturing in many different industries that are highly competitive. We believe in the Mexican worker, we believe in its skills, in its competitiveness, we believe in our location. So we're pretty confident that no matter what the scenario is, we will continue to thrive and be successful. But of course, our preferred scenario is to continue being part of a North American free trade agreement, and for a reason. We strongly believe in North America as an ideal and as the region that can be the most competitive region in the world. So in a way, this process is about collectively seizing an opportunity, a great opportunity for the benefit of the people of Mexico, of the United States, and Canada as well. There are many other things happening in the world and many other subjects that surround Mexican foreign policy. But I want to keep it short, Alex, and let's move into Q&A. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Secretary Louise, thank you very much. So let's go straight into the Q&A. I'm not going to sum up anything. And there's roving microphones, are there not? So please, the gentleman there, first of all, do tell us who you are.
It's Thomas Cole, the organisation Open Britain. Foreign Secretary, you mentioned the modernisation of the EU-Mexico Global Agreement. In the course of the Brexit negotiations, the UK Trade Secretary Liam Fox has said the UK would look to copy and paste existing EU trade agreements. Would that be possible in the case of the global agreement with Mexico or not? Thank you.
I'm sorry, you mean a trade agreement between the UK and Mexico? Yes. Well, that's certainly something that we're looking forward and actively pursuing. I should tell you that the morning after the Brexit vote, we had a press conference in Mexico, and one of the things that we said, obviously, back then I was Minister of Finance, so we were concerned about the things going on in the currency markets and so on. But one of the things that we said is we want to have a free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. And we've sent a letter 3 days after the Brexit vote, and now we have engaged with Her Majesty's government on doing so. I spent some time with Minister Fox yesterday, and of course we have to wait until the Brexit process is cleared, so that we can formally engage with the UK towards that. But this is something that we definitely want to pursue. We think there's tremendous value on that. I can tell you, no matter what the outcome of the NAFTA negotiations, or if it's a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, or whatever kind of Brexit you may have, I can assure you, we want to have a strong trade relationship with the UK and have a trade agreement with the UK.
Thank you. Let's go right to the back. Please, yes. I know who you are, but lots of other people won't.
I'm Jacob Parakilis. I'm the Deputy Head of the U.S. and the Americas program here. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your remarks. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the non-trade conversations you've had with your American counterparts in the new Trump administration, particularly around the areas of security cooperation, cooperation against drug trafficking and drug violence. Have those been significantly different than the conversations that were had in the sort of later years of the Obama administration? Is there a sense that the U.S. is taking beyond the obvious sort of things that Trump has talked about, is there a sense that the U.S. is taking a fundamentally different view to security in the Western Hemisphere? Thank you.
Certainly, that's a very important question, because when we think about the Mexico-U.S. relationship, that is a complex, rich relationship that goes well beyond trade. And one of the areas of cooperation is on security, including our fight against transnational crime organizations or preventing terrorism. And here is an area where we have some very welcome developments. The cooperation has not only not stopped, but actually has become more active. And the high-level dialogue, I think, is better than it was. It was already very good with the Obama administration, but now we found a very engaging, very active counterparty that is willing to even think out of the box on these very challenging problems that we face. I think the most important development is an agreement that we have that we need to change the paradigm under which we fight transnational crime organizations. Historically, Mexico and the US used to play sort of a blame game in which Mexico blamed the US for being such a large market for drugs, to consume so many drugs that it created violence, as it does create violence in Mexico. And then the US was blaming Mexico for sending so many drugs and creating so many disruptions into America's society. But unfortunately, just pointing fingers at each other is not a very effective way to address the problem. In fact, it surrenders a competitive advantage, a strategic advantage to the crime organizations. So one of the very first things that we agreed back in May with the Trump administration, and this involved Secretary Tillerson and then Secretary Kelly and others at the cabinet level, was that we need to work under a paradigm of shared responsibility. and under the paradigm of shared responsibility, have specific actions that thoroughly dismantle not only the transnational crime organizations, but also the underlying business opportunity. Because if you go after one criminal organization, but the underlying opportunity, the business opportunity, deeply criminal but highly profitable business opportunity remains, there'll be some others that will seize the market. So we are under that process. I believe that the cooperation towards this purpose is very, very strong. And it's one of the reasons why we want to have a successful agreement in other parts of the relationship, including trade, so that we continue to have momentum and have the political willingness in both sides of the border to continue pursuing this, which is a significant development in our joint strategy towards fighting organized crime.
Thank you very much. So the gentleman right here.
Javier Geleta, UCL researcher. I was wondering, in regards to Russia, what is Mexico's position regarding Russia, and what would be the objectives of your upcoming trip to Russia?
Well, I will be in Russia next month. President Peña Nieto met with President Putin early September in China when the BRICS invited Mexico to attend the meeting in Xiamen in China. I just met with Sergei Lavrov in New York when the United Nations General Assembly took place, and now I will be there. We see opportunities, particularly economic opportunities in our relationship with Russia. Trade is relatively small, and investment is relatively small, but given the sizes of our economies, we believe there's an opportunity. We are seeing now some Russian investments, particularly in the sector of energy. Russia has a good track record, particularly in hydrocarbons, and we've gone through a wide-ranging energy transformation in Mexico, and energy reform that now attracts capital from throughout the world. So that's an area of interest. And we want to attract certainly more Russian tourists into Mexico. We believe we have a climate advantage, particularly throughout the winter, so we'd like to see more Russians travel into Mexico. Next year, there's the World Cup in Russia, so we expect more Mexicans to travel into Russia next year, and hopefully that will continue. So we see it as an opportunity, particularly on the economic side of the relationship.
Thank you. A question: is Mexico only interesting for men? There's no women asking any questions here. It can't be just a male domain. You're breaking the pattern. Good. You're welcome.
Hi, Katerina Sanchez, working for Janes. I'm wondering, what is the Mexico position regarding Venezuela? Why haven't we seen more pressure from Mexico? What is the line of plan with that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's the first time in months that I've seen someone suggest that we've not put enough pressure on Venezuela. In fact, in my own country, the kind of heat I get is because of the opposite, because historically Mexico has refrained from taking a position on that issue, and that has changed this year. And we've been very, very active, consistently saying a few things, and collectively acting through first through the Organization of American States, and more recently the Lima Group that will be again meeting next week. What we believe is that in Venezuela we're witnessing a dismantling of democracy, and that is something that should concern us all, concern everybody in the region. And you see a systematic breakup of democratic institutions, either by canceling elections or postponing elections, and then when they happen, they are not under fair play rules, taking away the powers of the elected Congress, the National Assembly, sending opposition without cause into jail, and then suddenly creating a so-called constitutional assembly without respect to the constitution and the laws, and overriding the existing powers. What we're seeing is a very consistent trend of eroding democratic institutions at the same time that a humanitarian crisis is happening. This is an economy without growth. Actually, GDP has contracted about 25% for the past 3 years. That's pretty dramatic. Inflation is going very high, probably 700% a year in 2017. So the situation is quite worrisome. And we acknowledge that it's only for the Venezuelans to decide how are they going to solve this problem. But we're using all our diplomatic capabilities to foster and facilitate the process. Back in August 8, a set of 12 countries formed the Lima Group and had our first meeting on Venezuela, in which we said some pretty strong things, including that we would not recognize any financial transaction that has not the required approval by the National Assembly. And in particular, those financial transactions that only have the approval of the Constitutional Assembly should not be recognized by any authority of the 12 countries. And these are the major economies in Latin America and Canada as well. So we are taking action. I should say that we were invited by the opposition a few weeks ago and also invited by the government. I got a letter from the foreign minister inviting Mexico to be part of a negotiating process. That has not happened. And I don't know, after the election, the regional election occurring on Sunday, last Sunday, I don't know if that's going to happen, but we always say we're willing. As long as the process is serious, is for real, is in good faith, and will effectively create a path towards the reestablishment of democracy, we'll always be there. We don't believe in any kind of violent resolution or a military outcome, either from internal or external. We strongly oppose any possibility like that. But we will continue to engage through and exhaust all our diplomatic efforts towards this end.
Okay, more questions. So the gentleman right at the back there, you sir.
Thank you. Matthew Powell from L1 Energy. Through our portfolio company, Deutsche Erdöl, we have 2 joint investments with Pemex in the exploration and production sectors. As a result of the recent energy reforms, do you expect those reforms to continue and be extended after next year's presidential election?
Well, we certainly expect those reforms to prevail for 2 reasons. One is that these reforms are grounded in a constitutional reform, and it's not easy to change Mexico's constitution. You need a 2/3 majority in both chambers and don't get half of the state legislatures to vote for a change. That's in part the reason why it took so long to adjust the Mexican constitution towards an energy reform. It only took 70 years. So we don't expect that to happen frequently. But more important, we are already seeing the benefits of the reform. And first of all, the amounts of investment that is attracting is being attracted into Mexico. The commitments are already over $60 billion of capital that will be invested only in oil exploration and development. And this is going to create jobs and will increase Mexico's oil production, benefiting public finances. So at the end of the day, it will be very unlikely to see a government of any political orientation to go against the national interest. And it would be quite difficult to do it politically. So we certainly expect those reforms to continue.
Thank you. Looking over here, we haven't looked at this part of the room. Thank you.
Hi, Janet Bauer, working for Sibylline. Just following on from that last question, one of the things we've seen in Mexico recently is not only the dispersal of crime, but also the diversification of crime. And hydrocarbons theft is one of those things. So I just wondered what the Mexican government's strategy is for that moving forward.
Well, crime is and violence is not even around the country, but it's heavily concentrated in the routes of the drug trade. And unfortunately, when you have transnational crime organizations that have a criminal capacity and skills, those might spill over into other activities. And certainly that's been the case of fuel and robbery of fuel, which is a significant problem, not only because of the violence it creates and the insecurity that entails, but also because of the damage it does to the finances of Pemex. So one of the priorities there is by Pemex and by security forces is to address that issue and do so with technology, not only with force. And we've found Pemex over the last few months has found some significant new technologies that will help prevent that, and we expect this problem to be contained and significantly reduced over the next couple of years.
Thank you. And the gentleman here in the corner.
Thank you. Larry Stone from BT. I wonder what your view of the future of the WTO was, and in particular what you hope for from the ministerial meeting in Buenos Aires later this year. I know Costa Rica is putting together a recommendation on digital trade and e-commerce, for example.
That's a great question. I think nobody believes that WTO is perfect, and every country has its own complaints about WTO. But we strongly believe that WTO is more important than ever, particularly in a framework where regional or bilateral agreements are challenged. WTO provides a framework for trade, global trade, that is more important than ever. So it's important that the ministerial is meaningful, that it's not just focused on a couple of minor issues and then a lot of talk. We'd like to see some progress, first of all, on having a common language and common statistics. I think one of the initiatives that the UK government is pursuing is to having a harmonization of the data, particularly using value-added data, not gross trade values. To have a common framework for dispute resolutions that is agreeable, and of course more liberalization. But I think right now what is most important is to make sure that the organization works in a way that there are no parties that see a better life without WTO or outside of WTO. So this is an important meeting in Buenos Aires, and it's got to be one that reminds everybody of the importance and the usefulness of the organization. And we will, as a country, we strongly support the organization and the success of the Buenos Aires meeting.
Thank you. The gentleman here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As Mexico looks to renew and update trade agreements, not just with NAFTA, but with the EU, is there any chance that cross-border financial services would be contemplated, especially bearing in mind that there's a greater level of equivalence in regulation between the different parties of those trade agreements?
Can you introduce yourself too, please?
Gabriel Anguiano from the Lloyd's market.
Thank you.
So that's my question, financial services, that's why.
Thank you. Well, trade agreements typically include some degree of liberalization of financial markets. That's the case of NAFTA. And you see Mexico as a financial center. It's a very open financial center, and we have financial institutions from all corners of the world establishing in Mexico, and the ability to transact openly with clearing houses throughout the world. And one of the benefits of the financial reform that happened early in the administration of President Peña Nieto was an increased liberalization of our unilateral liberalization of our ability to do cross-border financing, either be banking or asset management, private equity funds, insurance. we are already working under a very open architecture. I believe that the most significant challenge is not really trade liberalization or the inclusion of financial chapters in trade liberalization, but it's more about the de-risking process going in the financial sector and making sure that we have a robust enough systems in terms of countering illicit finance and anti-money laundering provisions that allow us to be sustainable as a platform for financial integration. But the framework we have is already extremely open and very effective in that sense.
Thank you. More questions? Plenty. Good. This gentleman there.
Hi, Rob Hutton from Bloomberg. I was wondering if you could expand a bit more on whether you think you have room for manoeuvre in NAFTA negotiations with the US, and how much room you think you have. And also,
so can you repeat, because I didn't listen?
Sorry, how much room for manoeuvre you think you have in your NAFTA?
For a what? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. And also, whether you had any advice for a largish European country seeking a trade deal with the United States?
I'll start with the second one. Engage early, and engage. The only way to get things done with any administration, and particularly with this one, is start a conversation as soon as possible and try to understand what are the specific objectives that go beyond the general rhetoric. And that's what we've been doing since day one. And I think the process has become an orderly process, a professionally driven process, which is much better than just having stump speeches driving the narrative. What margin of maneuver? Yeah, I think we do have. All sides have margin of maneuver because we're important to each other. Mexico is a pretty big market for U.S. exports. And if you ask corn producers in Iowa or dairy producers in Wisconsin, or even auto parts manufacturers in Michigan, they do want to keep access to the Mexican market. Or the state of Texas. The state of Texas alone last year sold $95 billion of exports into Mexico. That's a pretty big market to lose. So yeah, we do have, we are important, and we need to remind ourselves that no matter how big the US is, and of course it's the largest economy in the world and the largest market, but we are a pretty important country as well for the relationship. And that gives us, and Canada is a very important market as well. It's the most important export market for the US. So these are important countries. And we need to remind that ourselves all the time, and that creates an ability to negotiate. This is not a unilateral negotiation. This is a trilateral conversation where it's normal to have disagreements, and we'll need to figure out how to solve those disagreements, how to bridge the gaps, and create value for the three parties. So yeah, we of course have margins, and we will exploit those margins in a constructive way.
Thank you. The lady there.
Meryl Laurie White. I'm an international lawyer with Debevoise and Plimpton. And my question is, how has the US's stance on climate change and Paris affected your view of international regulation of investments in and out of Mexico? And how have concerns of climate change, you mentioned anti-corruption and human rights, affected the way that you're thinking about international investment protection with other states?
Well, on climate change, we believe it's very unfortunate that the US has pulled out of the Paris Accord, and it will have absolutely no effect in our position in the matter. We believe that climate change is for real, that we need collective action in the world, and that the Paris Accord is a significant step in the right direction. We were one of the first countries to present our goals, our emission reduction goals, we pride ourselves of being a leader in the matter, and whatever the United States does in terms of their own stance towards the Paris Agreement will have zero effect on Mexico. And we also believe that climate change is good for business, and that and we want to continue making progress in clean energy. And if you go around Mexico, you immediately see an emergence of clean energy, either solar or wind power or other forms of clean energy. And that's because we've created laws that foster that and will allow us to fulfill our targets within the Paris Agreement. So it's unfortunate. I think it's a lost opportunity for the US, but we move on. We believe in climate change as a real threat, and we believe in collective action, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. Gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Jessup Taylor from the U.S. Embassy. You mentioned the willingness on the part of Mexico to try to incorporate some of the priorities of the Trump administration into the NAFTA negotiations. Do you see on the part of the U.S. a willingness to do the same for Mexico? And lastly, you mentioned the possibility of a no-deal scenario. What is the probability of that?
Well, let me tell you, if the U.S. was not willing to engage in a negotiation, why spend so much time? Why do all these rounds and involve literally hundreds of people in this process? So yeah, we from what I see at the senior level and what we see at the negotiating process, we see definitely a willingness to engage in good faith. This is not a simulation. It does not look like that. It does not feel like that. And we believe it's a serious process where the three countries are working with faith. We may have differences in opinion, but we're willing to engage in a negotiation. And if you're willing to negotiate, that means that you acknowledge that you have to accommodate some of the other parties' priorities. So it's a process that we treat seriously, and we respect the process.
Thank you. So, gentleman here.
John Curtis, House of Commons Library. It has been suggested post-Brexit that the UK may become more engaged in regions like Central and South America. What opportunities do you think this would bring, and what role could the UK play in a region like yours?
Well, we are looking forward to continue having a very good relationship with the UK. It's not only a diplomatic relationship, but it's a relationship about trade and investment, and we see significant UK investments happening in Mexico, including energy, but not only energy. It's in manufacturing, it's in food, it's in certainly financial sector. It's very important, the investments that we have from the UK, and we want more Mexican companies to be in the UK. There are some that are doing very well, and we want that trend to continue. We want to expand our trade, and we want to have a very important presence of the UK in our country and of course in the region. Brexit or no Brexit, hard Brexit, soft Brexit, whatever you guys decide, that is not what will determine our relationship with the UK. This is a country that we admire. This is a country that we know well, and we want more of the UK in Mexico and certainly in the region.
Thank you. Gentleman there.
Thank you. Graham Stock from Blue Bay Asset Management. You mentioned that the bulk of the trade deficit with the United States can be explained by the auto sector and that there's scope for adjustment there. Could you explain exactly how you see that rebalancing occurring? And secondly, you seem quite optimistic about the scope for professionalism and technical basis leading the negotiations forward. Your Canadian counterparts seem much less optimistic in that regard. Could you maybe explain why there might be a difference of opinion there, particularly given President Trump's greater hostility towards Mexico and Mexicans than towards Canadians? Thank you.
Well, I think the last two questions you should address to the Canadians and to the Americans. But let me talk about the car industry. The proposals that the U.S. put forward are mainly two. One is about rules of origin, and the other one is about national content. On rules of origin, it's an idea that we don't reject conceptually. We just think that it's got to be done carefully. with a reasonable, with target that is reasonable and also with reasonable transitions. And the discussion is going to be about that. But if you think about it, this is something that can be good for Mexican suppliers, as well as for American and Canadian suppliers. The national content rule is much more problematic. And we oppose that because it goes against the very nature of a free trade agreement. So we think that we should be working on rules of origin and not opening that possibility. If you think about it, we can come back and asking national content rules on any item where we have a deficit with the US, which are many. So that might open a very counterproductive dynamic in the negotiations. So we believe we got to stay focused on things that benefit the three parties. That's the only way to have a productive negotiation. And a lot of the change and the changes that might happen in the auto sector will relate to the rules of origin, regional rules of origin, not national rules of origin.
Thank you.
And by the way, we get along with Canada great. And if anything, this process has brought us a lot closer to Canada.
Okay, please.
Peter Gordon-Finlayson, Sibylline. Foreign Minister, thank you very much for everything you've said so far. We're in the midst of the 19th National Congress in China at the moment, which President Xi opened with a strong message of Chinese economic growth going forwards. How much do you see China as a competitor on the world stage, and how much as an opportunity for Mexico?
Well, China is both. It's at the same time it's a competitor because they manufacture a lot of things that we also manufacture, and we compete in world markets. But most of all, we see China as an opportunity. We acknowledge that China is a growing economy, eventually will be the largest economy in the world, the most powerful economy in the world, and we want to have a very good relationship with China. That's the reason why, from the beginning, President Peña Nieto developed a relationship with President Xi Jinping. We elevated the nature of our diplomatic relations to a strategic alliance and integral strategic alliance. And we are working in ways that get us closer to China. Our trade balance is kind of lopsided. We buy $70 billion of goods from China and we only sell 5. So we would like to sell more into China. And also, we want to attract more Chinese investment into Mexico. For that end, we created a China-Mexico Fund that is managed by the IFC of the World Bank Group. And it's already investing in things like telecommunications and infrastructure. And we two Chinese banks, including the largest bank in the world, the ICBC, has established a presence in Mexico, which was not the case just 2 years ago. So we are seeing now a lot more of Chinese activity in Mexico. It's something that we welcome. We see China as an opportunity, and we want to have a close dialogue with a country that is already extremely important and will only grow into more relevance.
Thank you. Is there a follow-up? Yeah, go on.
Just how much are you concerned about fears over US sanctioning of Chinese banks around the North Korea crisis?
Well, we're watching closely, and we would react accordingly. But from what we've heard directly from both the Chinese government and the US government is that they are both engaged, working together towards a solution to this very complex crisis in North Korea.
Thank you. Secretary Luis, I've got a question, which is Security Council reform. So clearly Mexico is interested in that. So how do you see any progress on that? Have you talked to the UK government, to your counterpart, about how to pursue Security Council reform?
Yeah, well, we think that the conditions in 2017 are very different from what they were in the late 40s. Yeah. And that there's a benefit to rethinking the structure of the Security Council, and particularly the use of the vetoes. Mexico has been pushing forward alongside with other countries like Germany, the fact that there should be a little bit more openness in the Security Council. and limitation to the vetoes.
Yeah.
So that for some very specific set of matters, the veto should not be an excuse for having no action from the UN and the community of nations. But it's a complex problem. Obviously, those who have a veto already might be reluctant to have more openness in the Security Council. So this is an ongoing dialogue. But what I can tell you is that we will continue to work constructively towards that end. We have done so in the past. We're doing that now, and I'm pretty sure that we'll continue to do so in the future.
Thank you. I do have one final question, but does anybody else? We've got 4 minutes to go. Okay, the front row. You, sir. You haven't got a tie on, so you get the privilege.
Thank you, Alex.
There you go.
Tom Wales from BP. Mr. Secretary, would you mind saying a little bit more about the timetable for NAFTA talks and ratification? I don't need to tell you that we have important elections in both the U.S. and Mexico next year. Is it possible to conclude a negotiation and ratification of a new NAFTA before the election cycle gets deeply underway? Or is this something that is going to have to be left for the next Mexican Congress and government to deal with? How optimistic are you there?
Well, we expect negotiations between the executive branches to be completed in the first quarter of next year, hopefully in the early part of the next the next quarter, and that would mean that ratification will have to happen afterwards. It's unlikely, but this is only my political opinion. It's unlikely that you'll have ratification of such an important treaty before the presidential election in Mexico. After that, there are different scenarios. If it can happen with the outgoing Congress or happening with the new Congress, that is hard to predict right now. But I think it's unlikely to have in Mexico congressional ratification before the presidential election, which happens in the first week of July. As for the U.S., again, it's harder for me to predict, but I believe this is something that would also dates are different, so there's a higher chance that this goes into Congress. It would go into Congress before the midterm election, but again, politics are politics, so it's hard to predict. But we want to have a deal at the executive branches level that is can be sent to Congress.
Thank you. Was there a final question here or not? No? Okay, I have one final question, which is your ambassador is in the front row here, Secretary. So when he files back his diptel for you in a year's time, what would you like to see the kind of message about the UK-Mexico relationship in a year's time? What would be what you'd be looking for?
Oh, so that's his to-do list.
Yeah, he's there. He's listening. Your ambassador to the Court of St. James.
He's a great ambassador. So
indeed.
This is not a wish list. This is a prediction. First of all, we want more trade to happen, regardless of the environment. We want to continue to attract investments. I would place a focus on clean energy. We want to increase our educational exchanges. Already, the UK is the place where most postgraduate students from Mexico come.
Really?
Not even the United States. It's the UK where more people.
So why did you go to MIT then?
It was back in the day.
Okay.
And particularly we already have over 400 Mexican students just in Aberdeen learning about oil and development offshore and that. So that would be one of the most important focuses to do that. I will not ask him to have a state visit because we already had that. To have a dual year, we already had that. Yeah. But we want to continue to have more investment, more trade, and more academic exchanges.
Secretary Louise, thank you very much. And thank you for the audience for robust and incisive questions. We end exactly on time. So, ore inglese.
Thank you.